Ravana now shot off what he considered his deadliest weapon, a trident endowed with extraordinary destructive power, once gifted to Ravana by the gods. When it started on its journey, there was a real panic all round. It came on flaming toward Rama, its speed or course unaffected by the arrows he flung at it. When Rama noticed his arrows falling down ineffectively while the trident sailed towards him, for a moment he lost heart. When it came quite near, he uttered a certain mantra from the depth of his being, and while he was breathing out that incantation, an esoteric syllable in perfect timing, the trident collapsed. Ravana, who had been so certain of vanquishing Rama with his trident, was astonished to see it fall down within an inch of him, and for a minute wondered if his adversary might not after all be a divine being, although he looked like a mortal. Ravana thought to himself, this is perhaps the highest god. Who could he be? Not Shiva, for Shiva is my supporter. He could not be Brahma, who is four-faced, could not be Vishnu, because of my immunity from the weapons of the whole Trinity. Perhaps this man is the primordial being, the cause behind the whole universe. But whoever he may be, I will not stop my fight until I defeat and crush him, or at least take him prisoner. With this resolve, Ravana next sent a weapon which issued forth monstrous serpents vomiting fire and venom with enormous fangs and red eyes. They came darting in from all directions. Rama now selected an astra called Garuda, which meant eagle. Very soon, thousands of eagles were aloft, and they picked off the serpents with their claws and beaks and destroyed them. Now, seeing this also fail, Ravana's anger was roused to a mad pitch, and he blindly emptied a quiverful of arrows in Rama's direction. Rama's arrows met them halfway and turned them round so that they went back, and their sharp points embedded themselves into Ravana's own chest. Ravana was weakening in spirit. He realized that he was at the end of his resources. All his learning and equipment in weaponry were of no avail, and he had practically come to the end of his special gifts of destruction. While he was going down thus, Rama's own spirit was soaring up. The combatants were now near enough to grapple with each other, and Rama realized that this was the best moment to cut off Ravana's head. He sent a crescent-shaped arrow which sliced off one of Ravana's heads and flung it far into the sea. And this process continued. But every time a head was cut off, Ravana had the benediction of having another one grown in its place. Rama's crescent-shaped weapon was continuously busy as Ravana's heads kept cropping up. Rama lopped off his arms, but they grew again, and every lopped off arm hit Matali and the chariot and tried to cause destruction by itself. And the tongue in the new head wagged, uttered challenges, and cursed Rama. On the cast-off heads of Ravana devils and minor demons, who had all along been in terror of Ravana and had obeyed and fleeced him, executed a dance of death and feasted on the flesh. Ravana was now desperate. Rama's arrows embedded themselves in 100 places on his body and weakened him. Presently, he collapsed in a faint on the floor of his chariot. Noticing his state, his charioteer pulled back and drew the chariot aside. Matali whispered to Rama, "This is the time to finish off that demon. He is in a faint. Go on, go on." But Rama put away his bow and said, It is not fair warfare to attack a man who is in a faint. I will wait, let him recover," and waited. When Ravana revived, he was angry with his charioteer for withdrawing, and took out his sword, crying, "You have disgraced me. Those who look on will think I have retreated. But his charioteer explained how Rama suspended the fight and forebore to attack when he was in a faint. Somehow Ravana appreciated his explanation and patted his back and resumed his attacks. Having exhausted his special weapons, in desperation, Ravana began to throw on Rama all sorts of things such as staves, cast iron balls, heavy rocks, and oddments he could lay hands on. None of them touched Rama, but glanced off and fell ineffectually. Rama went on shooting his arrows. There seemed to be no end of the struggle in sight. Now Rama had to pause to consider what final measure he should take to bring this campaign to an end. After much thought, he decided to use Brahmastra, a weapon specifically designed by the creator Brahma on a former occasion when he had to provide one for Shiva to destroy Tripura, the old monster who had assumed the forms of flying mountains and settled down on habitations and cities seeking to destroy the world. The Brahmastra was a special gift to be used only when all other means had failed. Now Rama, with prayers and worship, invoked its fullest power and sent it in Ravana's direction, aiming at his heart rather than his head. Ravana being vulnerable at heart. While he had prayed for indestructibility of his several heads and arms, he had forgotten to strengthen his heart, where the Brahmastra entered and ended his career. Rama watched him fall headlong from his chariot face down onto the earth, and that was the end of the great campaign. Now one noticed Ravana's face aglow with a new quality. Rama's arrows had burnt off the layers of dross, the anger, conceit, cruelty, lust, and egotism, which had encrusted his real self, and now his personality came through in its pristine form. One of one who was devout and capable of tremendous attainments. His constant meditation on Rama, although an adversary, now seemed to bear fruit, as his face shone with serenity and peace. Rama noticed it from his chariot above, and commanded Matali, "Set me down on the ground." When the chariot descended and came to a rest on its heels, Rama got down and commanded Matali, "I am grateful for your services to me. You may now take the chariot back to Indra." Surrounded by his brother Lakshmana and Hanuman and all his other war chiefs, Rama approached Ravana's body and stood gazing on it. He noted his crowns and jewelry scattered piecemeal on the ground. The decorations and the extraordinary workmanship of the armor on his chest were blood covered. Rama sighed as if to say, what might he not have achieved but for the evil stirring within him? At this moment, as they readjusted Ravana's blood-stained body, Rama noticed, to his great shock, a scar on Ravana's back and said with a smile, "Perhaps this is not an episode of glory for me, as I seem to have killed an enemy who was turning his back and retreating. Perhaps I was wrong in shooting the Brahmastra into him." He looked so concerned at this supposed lapse on his part that Vibhishana, Ravana's brother, came forward to explain, "What you have achieved is unique. I say so, although it meant the death of my brother." "But I've attacked a man who had turned his back," Rama said. "See that scar?" Vibhishana explained, "It's an old scar. In ancient days, when he paraded his strength around the globe, once he tried to attack the divine elephants that guard the four directions. When he tried to catch them, he was gored in the back by one of the tuskers, and that is the scar you see now. It is not a fresh one, though fresh blood is flowing on it." Rama accepted the explanation. Honor him and cherish his memory so that his spirit may go to heaven, where he has his place. And now I will leave you to attend his funeral arrangements, befitting his grandeur. Chapter 13, Interlude. To link up the narrative, an extract from Valmiki. After the death of Ravana, Rama sent Hanuman as his emissary to fetch Sita. Sita was overjoyed. She had been in a state of mourning all along, completely neglectful of her dress and appearance, and she immediately rose to go out and meet Rama as she was. But Hanuman explained that it was Rama's express wish that she should dress and decorate herself before coming to his presence. A large crowd pressed around Rama. When Sita eagerly arrived after her months of loneliness and suffering, she was received by her husband in a full view of a vast public. She felt awkward, but accepted this with resignation. But what she could not understand was why her lord seemed preoccupied and moody and cold. However, she prostrated herself at his feet, and then she stood a little away from him, sensing some strange barrier between herself and him. Rama remained brooding for a while and suddenly said, "My task is done. I have now freed you. I have fulfilled my mission. All this effort has not been to attain personal satisfaction for you or me. It was to vindicate the honor of the Ikshavu race and to honor our ancestors' codes and values. After all of this, I must tell you that it is not customary to admit back to the normal married fold of a woman who has resided all alone in a stranger's house. There can be no question of our living together again. I leave you free to go where you please and to choose any place to live in. I do not restrict you in any matter." On hearing this, Sita broke down. "My trials are not ended yet," she cried. "I thought with your victory all our troubles were at an end. So be it." She beckoned to Lakshmana and ordered, "Light this fire at once, on this very spot." Lakshmana hesitated and looked at his brother, wondering whether he should countermand the order. But Rama seemed passive and acquiescent. Lakshmana, ever the most unquestioning deputy, gathered faggots and got a roaring pyre within a short time. The entire crowd watched the proceedings, stunned by the turn of events. The flames rose to the height of a tree. Still, Rama made no comment. He watched. Sita approached the fire, prostrated herself before it, and said, "O Agni, great god of fire, be my witness." She jumped into the fire. From the heart of the flame rose the god of fire, bearing Sita, and presented her to Rama with words of blessing. Rama, now satisfied that he had established his wife's integrity in the presence of the world, welcomed Sita back to his arms. Chapter 14, the coronation. Rama explained that he had to adopt this child in order to demonstrate Sita's purity beyond a shadow of doubt to the whole world. This seemed a rather strange inconsistency on the part of one who had brought back to life and restored her husband, a person like Ahalya, who was avowedly committed a moral lapse. And then there was Sugriva's wife, who had been forced to live with Vali, and whom Rama commended as worthy of being taken back by Sugriva after Vali's death. In Sita's case, Ravana, in spite of repeated and desperate attempts, could not approach her. She had remained inviolable, and the fiery quality about her essential being burnt out the god of fire himself. And as he had admitted after Sita's ordeal. Under these circumstances, it was very strange that Rama should have spoken harshly as he had done at the first sight of Sita, and subjected her to a dreadful trial. The gods who had watched this in suspense were now profoundly relieved, but also had an uneasy feeling that Rama had perhaps lost sight of his own identity. Again and again, this seemed to happen. Rama displayed the tribulations and the limitations of the human frame, and it was necessary from time to time to remind him of this identity. Now Brahma, the creator, came forward to speak and address Rama thus. Of the Trinity, I am the creator. Shiva is the destroyer, and Vishnu is the protector. All three of us derive our existence from the Supreme God, and we are subject to dissolution and rebirth. But the Supreme God who creates us is without a beginning or an end. There is neither birth nor growth nor death for the Supreme God. He's the origin of everything, and in him everything is assimilated at the end. That God is yourself and sits at your side now is a part of that divinity. Please remember that this is your real identity, and let not the fear and doubts that assail an ordinary mortal ever move you. You are beyond everything, and we are all blessed indeed to be in your presence. In the high heavens, Shiva encouraged Dasaratha to go down to the earth and meet Rama. He said, Rama needs your benediction after having carried out your commands and having gone through so much privation for 14 years in order to safeguard the integrity of your promises. Dasaratha descended in his true form into the midst of his family. Rama was overjoyed to see him again and prostrated himself at his feet. Dasaratha said, the moment is one of the supreme for me. This moment is one of supreme joy for me. For the first time in all these years, my heart is lighter. The memory of the evil use that Kaikeyi had made of my promise to her had stuck in my heart like a splinter and had stayed there. Although I had shed my physical body, the pain had remained unmitigated until this minute. It is now gone. You, with Sita, are the primordial being, and I was indeed blessed to have begotten you as my son. This is the moment of fulfillment for me. I have nothing more to say, and I will go back to my world and repose there in eternal peace. But before I go, I want you to ask of me something, anything I could fulfill for you. Rama said, your arrival here is the greatest boon for me, and I have nothing more to seek. All along, my only desire has been to see you again, and that is fulfilled. Dasaratha still insisted that Rama should state a wish that he could grant. Rama said, if that is so, please find a place in your heart for both Kaikeyi and Bharatha, and take back your vow by which you cut off their blood connection with you. I cannot think of her except as a mother, and Bharatha as a brother. Dasaratha at once replied, Bharatha is different. He has proved his greatness. Yes, I will accept him. But Kaikeyi, she ruined us all. She prevented you from being crowned at the last moment. I can never forgive her. Rama explained, it was not her mistake. I committed an unforgivable blunder in a straight way, accepting the kingship when you offered it, without pausing to consider the consequences. I should have had more forethought. It was not her mistake. Rama continued his plea for Kaikeyi so earnestly that Saratha finally acceded to it. A burden was lifted from Rama's mind, and he felt completely at peace with the world again. Dasaratha offered him blessings and a few words of guidance, and bade farewell to him. Then he took leave of Sita and Lakshmana separately and returned to his place in heaven.